Hello, and welcome to Keep the Channel Open. My name is Mike Sakasagawa, and this is episode 37. Today's guest is photographer Jonas Yip. Before we get to the conversation, though, I want to take a second and talk about cynicism. So, I had this interesting interaction a bit ago where I was talking about some activist-related stuff with a friend, and through the whole conversation, he consistently downplayed the effects that activists have been having recently, and even the level of activity, and to some degree even downplayed the degree to which things are bad right now. And I found myself getting pretty frustrated until I sat back and I kind of said, now I wonder what is behind this drive to deprecate. And, you know, of course I can't really know what's going on in anybody's head but my own, but the truth is that I used to be a pretty cynical person. You know, I'd look around at things other people were doing and think, oh, that'll never work. Or I'd find myself, you know, just sort of picking things apart and focusing on all the flaws, or just saying, whatever, things are bad, but they've always been bad. And at the time, what it felt like I was doing was being smart, you know, like I was seeing something more clearly than all these sort of earnest do-gooders, you know. But when I think about it now, what I realize is that cynicism was just a way of justifying my own inaction. You know, like as long as I could sort of downplay or find fault or whatever, it meant that I didn't have to get out there and actually try to make change, you know, actually do some work. And that was partially driven by, you know, laziness and comfort. But also, I think it was sort of driven by fear, you know, out of fearing to risk something, you know, and, you know, being afraid to put it all out there and then lose, you know, or even just be wrong. And obviously, I do think that it's important to think critically about issues and actions, but that's not really the same thing as cynicism, because when you think about things cynically, you find yourself becoming complacent, I think, or at least I found myself becoming complacent. Whereas when you think, or when I think critically, I find myself seeing opportunities mixed in with the risks and responsibilities too. So I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you find yourself being cynical and you find yourself mostly staying out of the fray because of it, maybe just take the opportunity to look at what's driving that cynicism. Maybe, you know, you won't end up with the same conclusions that I've come to, but maybe you'll discover some things that surprise you, and maybe it'll even shake you up a little bit. All right, so as I mentioned, today's guest is photographer Jonas Yip. Jonas and I have been friends for several years now, and I always look forward to getting the chance to talk to him. We first met back at the first Medium Festival here in San Diego. I've mentioned the Medium Festival a lot. I've met a lot of great people there, and Jonas is one of them. And you know, one of the things that really impresses me about Jonas is that every time I see him, he's got something new that he's working on, and that is just a amount of creativity that I certainly envy. Anyway, so I put a bunch of links to his projects into the show notes, and I encourage you to check those out. And now here is my conversation with Jonas Yip. Anyway, so how you been?
Good. How are you?
I'm quite well. It's
Yes.
been a little bit, exhausting recently, but...
Yes, I know. You've been very active. So.
What have you been up to lately, though?
Or activist, as the case may be. So.
Yeah, oh my God, yeah. But how about you? What have you been up to lately?
Well, I mean, a lot of my time, or my time and my wife's time, has been taken up with just following everything that's going on, of course, just to keep up on... Well, there's just so much going on, so...
Yeah.
And more so than ever before, reading up just to make sure we're actually on the right page and in terms of knowing what's going on. So
yeah, it's a full-time job.
Yeah. But in terms of the stuff we're talking about here, I've been continuing. I'm always like playing with pictures, right? So I have like a lot of projects going on at the same time. So I'm kind of so I can't say, oh, I'm working on this project. It's I'm working on many projects.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then like I just showed you something yesterday, which I said, oh, let me try this, and then boom, there's this kind of series of things that I want to see. Is this something interesting?
Yeah.
I do a lot of stuff like that. So
yeah, it was interesting seeing that stuff.
I've had some time to play with ideas like that. So.
Cool. Yeah, it's something that I always find that, at least for me, like when I mean, my work, like most of what I do ends up being just sort of pulled out of my life. So I can't, it's hard for me to really focus on photographic projects. Like for me, I end up always having a hard time being like, well, I'm going to buckle down and just work on one thing. It's more ends up being, I don't know, I dabble here and I dabble there. And eventually I realize, hey, I got a bunch of pictures that I could probably do something with.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly what I do. Is like, it's always in retrospect.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there was something here, or I've done enough of this that there's something there. And
it's
so that's why, like, when it comes to like writing the statement and stuff, it's like, well, I am retroactively applying it because I didn't go out with the intention of, pulling the stuff together necessarily. So
yeah,
for me,
and
I
know
it's exploring my archives to see what I've expressed.
Yeah,
so.
I think some people sort of often have this idea that everything needs to be sort of figured out ahead of time, and that's not something that I've really subscribed to.
Well, yeah, no, there's a lot of people that work that way. Like I have a project, I schedule out a time, or because a lot of times it means, I have to go somewhere, I have to, take a break from work, and I have to actually go work on this project, and I have a deadline, which is another issue. But no, that's just, it's not the way I work. So
yeah. I've always thought it was interesting that like every time I talk to you, you've got like 3 new things. So I'm always a little bit impressed, at least, or if not, maybe a little jealous. I feel like I move a lot more slowly than that, but it's always nice catching up with you because
there's the question of quality versus quantity there, of course. But
I guess.
But you'll know there's a lot of stuff that I do, and I have it. I'm showing people, and then it kind of disappears because it doesn't. Stuff doesn't automatically like go right up to my website. It's like I play around with it. It's like, is this something that I'll keep a year from now? So I always have stuff like floating around. Like, here's a project which may be something, maybe not. It's not necessarily bad, but is it something that fits with what I'm doing? And then there's a lot of stuff which doesn't even make it to showing people.
Yeah.
So,
but that's just like sort of the nature of artistic experimentation, right?
Yeah. I'm all about that. So.
Yeah. So it's good to stay open to stuff.
Yeah.
I remember. Well, let's back up just a little bit. So you and I met at the first Medium Festival, if I recall correctly, right?
Probably the first at the W.
Yeah.
In San Diego. Yeah, a long time ago.
Yes, I think that was in like 2012 or something like that. 2012,
like that.
Yeah, something like that. And I think you were actually one of the first people that I actually met and sort of sat down and talked to there. Mm-hmm. It was funny. I remember, that was my first time participating in anything like an arts festival, and I was super intimidated, and I remember there was some like waiting area or something, and you and this other guy whose name I can't remember, who is from Utah, I think.
Jeremias?
Yeah, that's the guy. We're just like really outgoing and like just introducing yourself to everybody and we just kind of
which is very strange for me. That's something I've had to work on, the whole introducing myself to people and talking to people and stuff like that.
I did not know that.
It's not at all natural to me. So
that's really interesting because that was my first impression of you as somebody who just like, you just came up and introduced yourself to me. And I was like, wow, that's not something that I've ever done.
Yeah. Like if I go to a party, then I'm not very good at getting into conversations and talking to people. But in the case of like Medium, it's like, well, I know why all these people are here and what we can talk about.
Yeah.
And we're here to meet people. So it's like, well, let's just start. So,
Yeah, that's true. I find a lot of times that I have such a phobia about small talk that, or even just like, and it's one of the things about this podcast that was kind of surprising to a lot of my friends and even kind of to myself, that I would want to take on a project that involves having conversations with people and making those public, just because I think I have sort of a reputation of being sort of quiet. But really, it's more just that, like, if I don't know that there's something I can talk about with people that we both will find interesting, then the anxiety gets a little overwhelming.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So.
Whereas, obviously, with this show and at Medium, like, you know, we're all there to, you know, be engaged with the arts, and so that's gives us that sort of touchstone. Sort of helps break that anxiety down, I find.
Yes.
Yeah. So we've known each other for a few years now, and meet up every year at Medium. It's I don't know about you, but it's always one of the highlights of my year, that festival.
Yeah, I try to go whenever I can. There was one year that I missed it, but I don't even go necessarily to do the reviews. Like this year, I went down. For the weekend, but also I went down early just so I could talk to everybody who was there doing reviews, and I actually see a lot more stuff that way. So
yeah, it's always sort of tough when you're there sort of on your own hustle, and then the first couple days you're definitely very focused on presenting your own stuff and that kind of thing, and also
figuring out your presentation and what to say. And what I always find is like it's basically at the end of those 2 days is when I know exactly what I'm going to say when you're done with the reviews. So.
Yeah. And I always sort of lament that that when you're a participant in the reviews, then you don't get it when they do that portfolio walk, where everybody who's a reviewee gets to show their work to the public, but you only get to see the ones that are in like the opposite half from your group.
You only get to see half. So
for some reason,
I got to see both sides this last year. So
yeah. For some reason, I always end up in the same group as like at least 2/3 of the people that I really want to see their work. So I end up trying to have to, hustle in between sessions or something to see. Hey, I really wanted to.
Luckily, with Medium, it's so cool that they have that everyone's hanging around outside, and so during the weekend or the week and the weekend, you're able to sit down with people one on one and see their work, and it's like small enough that you can actually walk around and meet everybody at some point. So that's what's nice about Medium. It's Medium. It's just the right size.
But it seems like every time I've seen you there, you've had a different body of work, if not like 2 or 3 new bodies of work that you bring with you, which I certainly do not do that. And like, it's something like I said, I've always been pretty impressed that you just seem to be really prolific. And that's something that, especially this year, I'm really struggling with, trying to figure out new work and that kind of thing. But sort of thinking about some of the older work of yours, that I'm sort of more familiar with.
Yes.
I have a couple of your books that I bought a while back. These I think you did them on MagCloud or something.
Yes, probably.
Yeah, but I really so the 2 that I have are Somewhere Between and Replace.
Yes.
And then I also have seen several times, you were showing it to me recently, your Paris Dialogues.
Yes.
And something that I always really enjoy about your work, I was actually just reading your bio on your webpage this afternoon, this morning, and there was a line in there that really seemed to sum it up for me, was that you're more interested in capturing feeling than in capturing detail.
Oh, okay.
And I thought that was a really good way of summing it all up. That that your photographs, to me, always seem very emotive, and but a lot of times, especially because it seems like you like to work with sort of like toy cameras and homemade stuff, and
yes.
play around with a lot of different techniques. A lot of the photographs that you have are, will be blurred or very grainy or things like that. But they really capture a very atmospheric quality.
Yes.
That I've always been very attracted to.
Thank you.
So this,
me too.
yeah. One of the ones that I remember thinking a lot about, that I have thought about a lot over the past few years, is your Somewhere Between series. So I was wondering if you could just sort of, for the listeners, just sort of talk a little bit about that one.
Sure. Should we start with describing what it is, or just go into?
Yeah.
So Somewhere Between was a series of pictures from my visits to China, or more recent visits. I had been there before, but like back in, this is 2011, I guess. That year managed to go back twice. I was in Shanghai in April, Shanghai and Suzhou, and then later in the year I went to Beijing because we had an exhibit there. So I was there for like a week, and then so I was there and I was taking pictures, and as I do when I travel, I have a chance to wander around, take some pictures, but I wasn't like setting out to shoot a project, as we were talking about. So it's when I came back, I started looking at the pictures. The whole question was like, well, what am I taking pictures of? And so what I ended up talking about, the reason it was called Somewhere Between is that, I was raised in Taiwan and Hong Kong. I was born in the U.S., so I was raised mostly here, but I also went regularly to Taiwan, and I lived in Hong Kong. And so I was on both sides of the Pacific. So I am bicultural. And so I am that Asian American, right? But then going to China, it feels like everything felt familiar because it's Chinese. And so you immediately think, oh yeah, it's kind of like a homecoming. This is supposed to be my home country. But then you very quickly realize that no, it's actually a very different Chinese. It's still a foreign country. And so it's like, well, what the idea with the Somewhere Between series was that, well, what am I taking pictures of? Because things like the temples and the Chinesey things weren't necessarily new to me. I I'll still photograph them, but they weren't the things that really catch my attention. Like, what am I want to go out and see, what's changing in, especially in Shanghai, where things are being torn down and built up, and, what's changing in this culture. So that's why it became this idea that I was somewhere between the two cultures. And then also the people in China are kind of caught in between, the past and the future, and well, everyone is, but it's just everything's changing so fast there that that's the kind of stuff I was looking for when I was there. And so when I came back and looked at my pictures, I've discovered there was a whole bunch which kind of worked very well together.
Yeah.
I don't know if it really successfully gave that idea, but there is a consistency to the pictures, which kind of made them, it held together pretty well. So
yeah, well, I mean,
I said there's a series here. So
yeah, I mean, even just in terms of stuff like color palette and stuff like that, they hang together real well.
Yeah.
And they sort of give you this impression, I feel, of someone who is, like you say, sort of in between, and it's because they do sort of give you the impression of someone visiting, but they're not like vacation snaps either, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of things, like there's one I'm looking at right now with some tangerines or something on a railing.
Yeah.
Small little details. Oftentimes there will be little slice of life things, but there's a sort of wistfulness to a lot of these pictures where like whether the frame is like, I'm looking at one spread right now, and I think you've done this book in a different version than the one that I have.
Do you have the tall skinny
I do
version?
have the skinny version, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I did a square version, which actually works better.
Yeah. But, like I'm looking at one spread right now where on one side it looks like an airport or maybe a train terminal that's very full. On the other side, it's like sort of a path in a park where there's a couple that's embracing in the background. And it's funny, like, so whether you are looking at this is the last spread in the book, whether you're looking at, spaces that are full or spaces that are more empty, whether you're looking close in at details or you're sort of a little further away, more removed, like there's this sort of, it's not loneliness exactly, but like a sort of longing quality to these photographs. Mm-hmm. That to me, it seems very familiar, like for myself, I've never been to Japan.
Yeah.
And, my family has been, or at least part of my family has been in this country for 5 generations. So it's not like I have a lot of connection there.
Yeah.
But there's something about that, maybe so-called home country kind of idea that I feel like is a really common like experience for Asian Americans and I assume for other immigrant and immigrant descendant communities here in the U.S. And it was something that always really resonated with me. This series of yours. Mm-hmm. I know that's not really a question, but but yeah, I mean it's that experience of being sort of between, I think that's something that is definitely part of the dialogue for many different immigrant communities here. And I see a lot of different people sort of struggling with getting their arms around what it means to be American or what it means to be, part of the other place.
Yeah, I've always been, in my case, I've always been part of both, right? So I'm perfectly comfortable there, or at least, in Taiwan and in Asian cultures in general. I'm just because I'm familiar with it. I've been there. So that's why it's my chance when I'm there, I can look beyond, the first impressions and hopefully go a little deeper.
Yeah. Is that something like, I guess, was something that I've always wondered looking at these photographs is whether you do truly feel like equally comfortable or I guess maybe equally uncomfortable in both places. 'Cause at least to me, some of the photographs sort of suggest, and all of these photographs are taken in China.
Yeah.
They suggest sort of, a tension between, this is a place where I belong, but also this is a place where I'm foreign.
Yes. Well, that's exactly what it was in China. It's like, well, because of, your initial thought is, oh, this is totally familiar. Everything is just, the food's the same. It's Chinese. I understand the language mostly. But then, you realize, no, it's not quite the same. That's why there's there's an unfamiliarity of how things actually work. Right. Mm-hmm. So.
It's interesting. I think
it didn't take me very long to feel fairly comfortable in Shanghai, but Beijing still feels weird to me. But
I think it's something that a lot of people who aren't a lot of like white Americans don't necessarily understand that there is a difference between like Asian cultures and Asian American cultures.
Oh yeah.
And that's definitely something that can be a little hard to get your arms around as well, even in that as a member of that community.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, have you been back to Japan or to Japan?
No, never. Okay. Which is something I've always been had a lot of anxiety about it, because I don't speak Japanese. So
yeah.
I don't know, something about the idea of everybody trying to talk to me and me not being able to. There's like a certain shame about that.
That's okay. When I go to Japan, I can't speak the language either. So
yeah,
people don't know until they.
The only place in Asia that I've ever been is actually Taiwan. I had to go there for work for like 2 weeks, I think. And we unfortunately didn't actually get to see very much of it. We just saw there was 1 mile from our hotel to the office where we were working. And in I think the city was called Shinshu. Mm-hmm. And then we saw that 1 mile, and then we saw like the highway between our hotel and the airport in Taipei, and that's about it.
Oh, yeah.
But it was a little, even that, like, I don't know, there was something about like being in that country, and like my white coworkers that were with me, like nobody was trying to speak Taiwanese to them, but like everybody was trying to speak it to me. And I was feeling a little weird about the whole thing, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't even have a reason to speak Taiwanese. So. Yeah, I don't know. I hope to get to Japan one of these days, but we'll see. My grandma goes all the time, so.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what you shoot while you're there, so.
Yeah, I have a suspicion that that my pictures would end up looking either just like everybody else's tourist pictures, or they would end up looking just like all of the pictures I take here.
Well, that's fine, right? That's what you
true.
want to find out. I mean, I take all the touristy pictures too, and then, you know, because you got to do that when you're seeing stuff. So I do both. I just get it all in there. So
So
I still have to document the trip. So
yeah, that's true.
I still got my selfies and stuff. So
yeah, and I mean, hell, I like taking those pictures too. I mean, some like, you know, sort of photo snobby people will say, "Oh, why are you doing that?" kind of thing. You just, you know, but I don't know. I find that you know, taking the photograph, even if it's, you know, sort of a cliche touristy photograph, like to me, it's like a way of like stopping for a second and actually looking at the thing. But I guess that's sort of a controversial topic for some people.
Oh, yeah. Well, some people say that you're not looking at it because you're busy taking a picture of it.
Yeah.
Whereas to me, that's what makes me look at it. Like you say, it's like, it's what makes me consider it more. So.
Yeah. Yes. I'm glad we're on the same page on that.
Yes.
So then the next body of work of yours that I think I tend to think a lot about is this Paris Dialogues. And one of the things that is really what makes that really interesting to me is that it is a collaborative work between you and your father, right? So it's photographs of yours and poems of your dad's.
Yes.
And so I'm really interested to sort of hear a bit, and I think you've told me before, but just, you know, for the listeners and to refresh my memory, like how that
so
came about.
It was not a planned collaboration. So what happened was there was one Christmas, this was shortly after I finally kind of pulled together some Paris pictures and discovered, there's a whole series here. And this was all a series done with one of my homemade lenses. So everything was kind of fuzzy and dreamy, a little plastic magnifying glass lens. And so here's a set of photographs. So it was right around Christmas. So for Christmas, I gave my parents a box of prints, and it was those 13 images from Paris, you know, nicely put in a box and everything. And so they took it, and the next morning my dad woke up and wrote one poem to each of the images. So those are the poems. Just all of them all at once in English. So he did them in English. And so each one was a response to the image, as opposed to, you know, me trying to match up with some poems that were already written or something. So that's why it became a dialogue. And of course we had, of course, the shared experiences of all those places in the past, because we would go together to Paris. So it wasn't coming from out of nowhere, but it was responses to the images. So, so we've done that we're trying to do that with some of the other series as well. So that's coming out in the future. But
cool. Well, I'll be excited to see that.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a really interesting, and the way that you have it laid out is that like each spread, there's one image and then the poem next to it.
Yes.
And it really, I'm very interested in how text and images can sort of function together and what sort of things you can do with those. And then I'm also always really interested in how collaborative processes work. Like, I think a lot of times, a lot of people, even a lot of artists, have this sort of way of thinking about sort of art as this sort of lone genius kind of thing, and you need to have complete control over everything. But a lot of stuff that I've seen that has been really interesting to me has come out of collaborations. And especially ones that focus on dialogue between the two artists.
Yes.
So that's something that, I don't know, I really enjoy about this work. Is thinking about that process. And then the other thing too that really also strikes me is that, and I don't know if it's because I know you or if it's because of the way that the images and the text work together or what, but like many of these places are very recognizably Paris locations. Like even the first photograph is like a chair next to a fountain that I think I recognize as being the garden that's sort of close to where the Louvre is.
It is.
Yeah. And, which I can't remember the name of, but it's one of those famous ones. So you have these places that are very sort of recognizable, especially in the first couple of images. Second image is a shot of the Eiffel Tower. And yet there's something that feels very, very Asian about the work, and I'm not sure if it's because like you mentioned your dad composed these poems in English, but then they're presented in English and Chinese.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, I can't read the Chinese, but I assume that's what the characters here are.
Yes.
Which I thought was a really interesting choice. To present the poems in two languages. I was sort of wondering what was behind that.
Well, first of all, I mean, he did the translations because he's a comparative. I mean, his specialty is comparative literature and translation and modern American poetry, and so this was all right up his alley. As to why he decided to do in both, I'm actually not sure. But I mean, it did become a dialogue between generations, between cultures, between father and son.
Yeah,
so all those things.
It's
I don't remember whether he did the Chinese right at the very beginning or whether we decided later it should be in Chinese too. But yeah, unfortunately, sorry, I don't know I don't have a good answer for that.
Oh, that's okay. But I mean, to me, looking at it,
it just seemed natural for us to do it that way. So,
yeah, I find it really fascinating because it adds this whole other element of dialogue, like you say, because just on the facing pages, you've got image, you've got text, and the one can sort of interpret the other. And the way it seems to function to me is like, even knowing that the poems were all written in response to the photographs, when you look at them on page, they really, they can go in either direction.
Yeah.
But then, so that's a dialogue right there. But then also the fact that the poems are all presented in two languages, that also presents a dialogue. And there's just something about this sort of juxtaposition of cultures where, Paris is a place that's such an iconic European place, but then you have that next to these Chinese characters. I don't know, there's something really interesting to me about that, and I can't quite articulate it.
So, this series was exhibited at the San Diego Museum of Art in 2011, I think. And towards the end of that exhibit, it was right during the summer, so we did one of their summer sessions or something they called it, and we did actually a poetry reading while the exhibit was up. And so we projected it, and we actually, read the poems. But for that one, we actually had someone there reading them in Spanish.
Oh.
So there was this poet from Spain who translated from the English to Spanish.
Interesting.
And so when we did that, we had, and he was, the guy reading it was so good. But it was very, very musical the way he read the Spanish. And so, yeah, we thought we'd bring that in as well. So there are Spanish versions of all of these as well. So,
yeah, cool. I did not know that. It's, I mean, I don't know. There's just something about.
I don't think there's a French version though. So,
I don't even know.
That's the thing with this whole. I mean, these are pictures of recognizable places in Paris, but it's not really the way Paris looks, right? Because it never actually looks like that. It's full of tourists and color for one, but that's why this is the way we imagine Paris to look, and that's why it was perfect for English and Chinese, and this is how we imagine it. Yeah, not being Parisian. This is our image of Paris. So.
Yeah, they are all very dreamy pictures as well. I mean, they're very, because of the way that you were shooting them, they're many of them are very indistinct, and I don't know. They don't feel like real life. They feel like a memory or like a poem, which works really well.
Yeah. Also, the funny thing was like that first image you're talking about with the chair, by the pond. It's all empty, and the first words in the poem were "empty park, empty chair." In real life, that day was. I mean, the reason that part of the park was empty was that was the last day of the Tour de France, and there were helicopters overhead. This is the spot where the cyclists were coming in or something. So there was all sorts of noise. There was cyclists were arriving at that time. There was like crazy stuff going on the streets just around here, like literally on this block. And so this image is nothing like what was actually happening there.
Yeah. It's funny too, because, we have such an understanding of photography as sort of like, as documentation of what things were actually like. But,
yes.
It's, there are so many ways that photographs can be misleading.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And to the point of this book, this series, that like what was actually happening behind you or outside the frame is pretty irrelevant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we have a bunch of I'm just keeping an eye on the time. We have we've just been burning through our time here, and I have a lot of stuff that I wanted to talk to you about, but I wanted to sort of
maybe we can make it a 5-part series.
Maybe, but one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is that. And I'm going to try to see if we can get in a little more chat about some of your other photographic work as well. But I've always found it really interesting that on top of being a photographer, that you're also a musician. And so far, I've talked to one other person for this show who also is a visual artist and a musician, and that was a photographer named Christina Riley. But it's something that having two creative outlets that are so completely different from each other is really fascinating to me, and sort of how thinking about how person
you photograph and you write, right, which are pretty different. Like I cannot write, for example, expressively, so it's very difficult.
They are different, and I do spend a lot of time, sort of contemplating how they're different and what they do differently, and what the strengths and weaknesses are of each medium. But there's something about music that, I don't know, music seems more different to me than writing. And this whole idea of how like a person can work in such completely different modes is really interesting to me. And so I
think the fact that they're different actually makes it, because it exercises different parts of the brain or the body and everything, that it seems more natural that they would go together, right? As opposed to like if I was a photographer and a painter, it's like, well, which those seem closer and weirder to me, that if I was trying to do both seriously and not just merging them somehow, right?
That's interesting. I never thought of it that way.
Whereas music is music, photography is my photography.
Yeah. So for you, you see them as very separate. And it's like, how do you find that do you go in waves where you're like mostly one and then mostly the other, or do you switch back and forth a lot, or?
Well, it depends on what you mean by wave. I don't do like 6 months of one and then 6 months of the other, but I'll do, a few days where, just because I'm working on it, I'll work on my photography.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But sometimes in a day, I'll just go back and forth too. So
it's just really interesting. I have a hard time switching gears myself.
Mm-hmm.
I find that I can't. It takes me so long to spin up on anything that I work on that I have to be able to give it my attention for a sustained amount of time. Yeah. Otherwise, I just don't end up working at all.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. That's why for me, like, I'm doing so many different things at once that and a lot of it is computer based now. So I can like be working Lightroom, shut it down, pull up Logic, and tweak a few things in a mix. That's like I've learned to just quickly do a few things just because I'm working on so many things at once.
Yeah.
So that kind of stuff I can do. That's why, like, for some things like that I used to do, I for example, well, like, I used to do a lot of programming for work, and that is something where I would need to, I need headspace to go in there, and with algorithms, so you have to like be in that space, and you can't come up. But I can't do that anymore, right? So that kind of headspace I can't do anymore. But I don't need that for the creative stuff for the most part, is what I'm finding.
Yeah, that's another thing that we have in common, that we both have technical jobs. Or do you still do that, or like?
I try not to. So when I do websites and stuff, it's like I'll do small websites or small personal things, or just like helping somebody debug some back end stuff. But like I've said, I've thought, oh wait, I should go write some useful apps, but I can't get into the space where I can actually sit down and do that. Right?
Yeah.
And there are times where like if I'm recording music with a band, then of course we'll devote a weekend or something.
Yeah.
But that's kind of that's not my normal way of doing things. Like right now, I could reach over and grab my guitar and start playing. That's not a big deal. So.
Yeah.
And I haven't really. There's nowhere where I really merge the two. So.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about doing?
Whereas you can write about your photography or stuff like that.
Yeah, I can.
Or you could do you could do a book with both writing and photography. Whereas, the closest my music and photography come together is like I use my pictures on our album covers. So I use my pictures in graphic design a lot. So
it would be hard to figure out something. I don't know, maybe some kind of a slideshow or something. I don't know.
Oh yeah, well, if we were doing some big world tour or something, and had the budget, then yeah, sure, I'd do a big multimedia piece.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, that tech connection also is something that I always think is interesting. I feel like I only know a few people who are sort of have been actively science or tech, and then also actively artists. It seems like it's not.
I knew a lot of engineer musicians.
I guess that's true.
Engineers that play in bands.
Yeah. A lot of engineer bassists out there.
And a lot of engineer photographers, but that's more of mostly from the gadget aspect, right? The cool cameras.
Yeah, most of the engineers that I know that are into photography are into it for the technical aspects of the equipment. Yeah. Rather than, like, a lot of times if I try and explain my photographic work to my coworkers, it's I'm always sort of struggling to try and convey why I would want to spend my time that way to some of these guys.
Yeah.
But
because I love the gadget side too, so I can, like when I was working in the company, and we would all talk about the cameras that were coming out and stuff like that. I got all that too.
Yeah,
I love that end too. So
it can be fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't. It seems like a sort of an unusual combination to have, particularly tech as opposed to science, which I think is another thing that a lot of sort of lay people don't really understand the distinction between. But but particularly with tech people, I find that they tend not to be quite as interested in sort of, I don't know, like they might be really sophisticated, like consumers of art or literature or things like that. But
yeah.
I just haven't found that many who are interested in making art.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Was that your experience as well?
I'm thinking now. I think, yeah, overall, that's pretty safe to say. It falls along those lines.
Yeah. Do you find that, like for me, I often find thinking about my job as being kind of, there are things about it that I enjoy, but I find it a little limiting in terms of like how I'm able to, like people will talk about like a piece of code being really elegant or like the creativity in problem solving. And I think there is that, but it's a really different thing than artistic creativity.
Yeah, I mean, there is that. I mean, I enjoyed the way you use your brain to solve problems. That's especially what I was doing. It was a lot of times I was solving problems, and that was great. But I always kept it separate from the expression. Like I mean, I love this problem solving aspect, but I can't say I was expressing anything with.
Yeah. 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 It's a distinction that I don't know, just in the way that people talk about creativity, I guess. Yeah.
But for me, I mean, I always had, I got my job and then I kept the music and photography stuff separate, which meant I could, as an engineer, I could buy more equipment and, so and just sort of support that stuff on the side as opposed to trying to make a living with it.
Yeah.
So, and then potentially not enjoy it anymore.
Yeah, that's true. One of the other ones that I've seen a bunch of your work, but one of the ones that I remember you showing me, I think it was year before last, was these dresses from the small years, photographs of yours. That was something that I really enjoyed, and it's unfortunate that like I can point people, and I'll put a link in the show notes to your website, of course, but like. It's one of these. This is a project that really doesn't come across on the website very well.
That's the whole problem I'm having with it. Is like not even just on the website, but like if I were to display it, how do I display it in a way that you can see what's going on? So
yeah. So can you describe what these photographs are?
So what's going on is that they're really delicate prints. So they're pictures of my daughter's dresses from when she was, I don't know, how old are you when you're that shape? Like 3 or 4, maybe.
How old is she now?
She's 11 now. So
okay.
But the really cute dresses, and they're all kind of delicate, and they're kind of as wide as they are tall because that's the way kids are shaped. And so I saved them in a box saying I'm going to do something with these someday. And so eventually I just photographed them. I think I photographed them on black. Just to have the record of them, and eventually, what I did for these prints, I mean, I tried a bunch of different things. Like I was going to use them as I was going to do like a full size anthrotype, like using like plant materials and having it just kind of and then exposing it in the sun, and so that you would get the image. You would get the image of the dress and things like that. But eventually, what I did was I put it on a really delicate Japanese paper, and I changed the tonality so that it was almost all just barely there. I think it's kind of grayish, whitish, very kind of high key and just no background. And so it's just the dress image printed on the paper. And, it's all about the ephemerality of childhood and how quickly that whole phase goes and it doesn't come back, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of those things. I'm always experimenting with papers or processes and things like that, but I don't want to do it just for the sake of I don't want to print on Japanese paper just because the paper's cool. I wanted to find the right subject for it. And this is one that really worked out. And so these prints are really delicate. And when you handle it, you feel the paper kind of crinkling and like it might rip. But that's really the way you want to see it. So like on the website, it just looks like a light image of a dress. If it was framed, like if it's actually framed and matted, then you can't really tell how delicate it is either. Yeah. And so I like to pull it out and show people, hey, check this out. What should I do with it?
Yeah, this is a very similar problem to some of the books that I've done, where like the most recent book I did, I think I showed it to you. I don't remember.
I saw whatever you were displaying this past year. I think it was, right?
Yeah. And it's the thing where like it kind of wants to be handled, and you want people to be able to touch it, but also, and at least with a book, you can kind of like, you kind of have to handle a book. Yeah. But it's also fairly delicate, and like don't necessarily want like people flipping through it and ripping the pages and stuff. And and like trying to think about how to sell these things is like how would you show them? How would you sell them? Like what would people do with them? I don't even know. But I remember being really struck by these. Like I think about these pictures a lot, and you only showed them to me the once, and it was like over a year ago now.
I think it must have been this past October or whenever we were down in San Diego. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, so then it wasn't that long ago, but I thought it was a year before for some reason. But yeah, they really stuck with me. I really think about these pictures a lot. I mean, part of this is just that they really hit on stuff that is very at the front of my mind all the time, sort of thematically. They fit right in my wheelhouse. Yeah. But like you say, like the way that they're done, I mean, the way that you've created these prints and how gauzy and like they're almost not there kind of thing. It's
especially when you hold it up to the light.
Yeah. So, yeah. And I got no idea what you should do with them, but I just remember being really impressed by how well the medium you chose supported the concept. And because it's one of those things where, I don't know, when arts are visual, you have a certain way of interacting with them, but like there's a sensory aspect to these prints that really. Like when you even without explaining it, when you touch them and you see them being handled and that kind of thing, that you really just get it,
Oh yeah.
I remember being very impressed by that. And
no, I mean everyone who gets to see them in person, they're like, yes, these are amazing. Yeah. And it's like, but here, look on my website. Oh yeah, whatever. It's a picture of a dress.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Well. I wish you the best of luck with it.
Well, I mean, I will create it, and then whether it can go where it goes from there is a different issue. So
yeah, that's true. So. All right, well, let's take a short little break. We'll come back. We'll do the second segment. Okay. So for the second segment, I always ask my guests to bring a topic for their own, and it can be whatever you would like to talk about, whatever's on your mind. So what would you like to talk about today?
Well, I was thinking about talking about the idea of the internet and how it is a kind of a permanent record of things that are going on, and what that means in terms of, what we're sharing. I mean, this idea of like the internet as Big Brother, effectively. So I don't know if you have any ideas there, or.
Well, why don't you get us started? What kinds of stuff are you thinking about?
What I'm thinking about is this whole idea of like when we were kids, or younger, we would do stuff. We'd get in trouble. We'd say stupid things. There's no record of it anywhere. Or even if we did something where it was enough to warrant getting into an official record and being in the newspaper in whatever town I came from, even something like that, if someone wanted to find out about it, they would pretty much have to go, put in quite a bit of effort to go, find the microfiche for that year or whatever.
Right.
And whereas nowadays, anytime anybody does something, you're easily Googleable and you can find all sorts of dirt about people.
Yeah.
And what that means in terms of, well, one reason I bring it up is because I very consciously say nothing online of substance. I don't engage in political stuff. Even to the point where there are times when I have something to say even about, it's just, somebody has a question about something, I'll just not participate. And then I don't post pictures of my child. That's, I'll let her deal with that later if she wants and stuff like that. Whereas I know other people have different feelings about that. And you, for example, share a lot.
Yeah.
On Twitter, you say a lot. You've got what's on your mind, what's going on. And, so I'm just wondering how you feel about that, all that.
Yeah. I remember when I was in college, I had this friend whose name was also Mike. And I remember this, so I was in college from 97 to 01. And so that would have been right around the time that social media was starting. I think Friendster and MySpace were around at that point, but not really. Facebook wasn't a thing yet.
No.
And I remember I had this friend, and he had he was talking about this back then about how, and to this day he's not on Facebook, and his whole thing. I remember it's a little bit funny now. It's a little bit funny now, but he was always saying, well, what if someday I wanted to run for president? Then somebody could dig up something about me that was on the internet, and then I wouldn't, that would mess things up for me. And I kind of think that recent events may have shown that making an ass out of yourself on the internet is not quite the same barrier to public office that it might once have been.
Yeah,
but it is an interesting thing.
There are a lot of stories of people just applying for a job and then they go find out about you and then nope, and it's not even stuff you posted yourself. People who've, I was just reading about one today where the girl, passed out. People posted pictures of her, and then later on she was, she lost her job because of that. That kind of thing.
Yeah,
so it's stuff that is there, and it's it doesn't go away now.
Yeah, and as you say,
just one time in 1999 or something, I talked to somebody on the street, and then it was somebody had spray painted some penguins on the ground, and they asked me, it was a Gorilla Linux ad or something, and I made a little quote about it, and it was in the local paper, or not the paper, but CNET or something. And still now that's if you search for me, that kind of pops up. It wasn't anything bad or anything. It's just but that's just there. It's always there now. So.
Yeah. I think this sort of, anxiety about what all this stuff means is something that we're all sort of wrestling with right now. And as you say, I do share probably too much on the internet. And even, like with my kids, they're part of my photographic work is images of them. And, and, I do share that on the internet, and it's something I've thought a lot about, what that's going to mean.
Yeah.
I have this impression that we're sort of in the middle of a shift, cultural shift on these, and that we haven't really fully settled on a new normal yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, these things about, people losing jobs or being denied jobs based on what they say on Twitter or, any of these things, I have this impression, and, I have no idea, but my impression is that as we continue to move forward and people just become more and more used to the idea of sharing stuff online, which people our age, we're about the same age. I think you might be
Oh, no, I'm much older than you.
You are much older than me. I'm actually looking at your bio right now. Yes, you are much older than I am. Not much older. You're 12 years older than me. But so people my age are really.
Wait, are you the same Chinese horoscope as me then? Are you a sheep or ram?
Yes.
Another similarity there. So.
Yeah. But so like people my age, or like my younger brother is 2 years younger than me, and we're like about the last age of people that it was weird to have a computer in your house when you were growing up. I remember like when I was in middle school and high school, it was still only like nerds that had computers in their house.
Yeah.
And now everybody does.
Yeah.
And I think it's sort of a similar thing. Like I have this impression that the younger generation, and not just like millennials, but like people my kids' age, are so used to that just being a regular thing.
Yeah.
That I kind of have this impression that the norms on that are gonna shift. You know, like by the time my oldest is 8, by the time he's out there looking for a job or applying to colleges or whatever, that like there's just going to be so much out there on everybody that I don't see how the same standards could apply, you know?
Yeah.
Especially because everybody does stupid shit when they're young, and like, so everybody's going to have things that might be considered incriminating now or in the recent past. Like, I mean, like, it seems like it can't, like, nobody would be able to get a job, you know?
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, it's something to think about. And
yeah, it's just something I've wondered about, and then, like you say, it is changing, but then it's hard to go back later and erase stuff. So because once it's out there, it's out there, kind of thing. So
yeah,
so
I mean, even
that's why I hesitate sometimes. So,
yeah,
a lot of times. But that's just me. I'm not saying what's right or wrong here, but
yeah. I had a little brush with a thing a while back, just in terms of what you can control. Like I had a photograph that even before I was really trying to be a serious photographer, I was just sort of dad blogging for a while, and I would put pictures that I thought were funny or cute or whatever of my kids, just as part of a daily blog. And one of those got picked up several years later and thrown up, and somebody made a meme out of it. And it was a picture of my son. It was a funny picture that I took of my son where he was at Chuck E. Cheese, and they had this sort of creepy looking bus where like the kid sits in the front seat and drives it, and you put a quarter in and it moves. But then there's this like creepy looking Chuck E. Cheese sitting in the back seat. And so, I made a little visual joke out of it, and somebody else took that joke and made a meme out of it. And then it got picked up by some big Tumblr, and, then all of a sudden it had gotten 20,000, reblogs. And I was like, I don't know what I think about that.
Yeah.
And so now I am a lot more, I went back and I took down a whole bunch of photographs that I had put up before that I, thought, I don't know if I want that one to get memed.
Yeah.
And, it is something that I think it's sort of fascinating, because that whole meme engine of the internet has been going on for quite a while now. And yet I think, so you'd think people would be more used to thinking about how their images and how their personas can be sort of co-opted by that. But I kind of think people aren't, like every time it happens, people are still surprised by it.
Yeah.
The people that it happens to.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe we're just always going to be caught off guard by it.
Well, yeah. I don't know. Well, anyways, I have my approach, and I'm just curious what's going to happen with it. So,
yeah, and I guess we'll see. But I don't know. I mean, thinking about how I think a lot about how my kids are going to interact with the world when they're my age, and the truth. The only thing I can settle on is I just have no idea.
Yeah, we have no idea. So,
yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, but like at our middle school, all the kids are on iPads.
Yeah,
and so like, at least my daughter at least is very fluid on it, and it's like the way they talk to each other, the way they communicate with each other, it's all it's very different from from what we did. So
yeah, it's true. And, I don't know, like my 5-year-old, she's in kindergarten right now, one of her best friend has her own iPhone. My wife and I were just like, look, we're sorry, but you can't have your own iPhone yet. But I don't know. I mean, it's just something. I tend to be, when it comes to things like that, I tend to be sort of two ways about it. Like, on the one hand, it sort of weirds me out that things are different now. But I also I try not to worry about it too much. I mean, I just sort of figure that, I don't know, like with the phone thing and texting and social media, like there's a lot of people who sort of wring their hands about, people aren't interacting with each other anymore. People are very narcissistic and self-centered now. And I don't really think that's true.
Yeah, there's plenty of, I'm certainly interacting a lot more than I do in person.
Yeah.
So online. So
yeah. So, I think things are going to be different, so. But I think, there are certain sort of impulses that we have as human beings that are always just going to be part of us.
Yeah.
And having connections and, family and friendships and stuff, I think that's always going to matter to people. Interesting. When you mentioned that topic, I wasn't initially thinking about sort of the Internet as Archive as the direction that you were going. I had sort of initially thought more about its use as like a research tool,
Oh, no. So that part is there too, and that's actually very exciting. Like the ability to find that information is great when you're looking for it too. So, so it's a matter of we need to kind of have some control over I feel we need to have some control over what information is deposited into the, into the record. So,
yeah,
that's why I'm kind of conscious and probably over careful about it. But that's just what I choose to do. So.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm not active. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm sharing stuff all the time. But if you go back and look, there's not a lot of, it's all just, clever things or cool things, but not really opinionated things.
Yeah. It did occur to me that if I ever quit my job and look for a new one, I might be well served to make my Twitter private for while I'm interviewing. I don't know. Maybe I can't decide whether that's paranoid or just sensible. Listen, I really appreciate that you were willing to take the time and talk with me. I've always appreciated our conversations across the years.
Yes, thanks for having me. So,
yeah. Okay, so if you want to keep track of what Jonas is up to, one way you can do that is by following him on Instagram. He has 2 accounts there, at Jonas Yip for his personal stuff and at Jonas Yip Photography for the more artistic stuff. And I put links to both of those in the show notes. And as I mentioned, there are a bunch of links in the show notes to his website where, in addition to seeing his images, you can also buy prints, photo books, and even some CDs of some of his music. So go check that out. And that is our show. If you would like to get in touch with me about anything you've heard on today's episode or anything you didn't hear on today's episode, anything at all, you can send me an email at podcast@keepthechanneleopen.com. You can also find me in the show on Twitter at ChannelOpenPod and on Facebook at facebook.com/keepthechanneleopen. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to help out, please, take a minute and leave a review on iTunes. There's a link in the show notes for that. You can also support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/sakeriver. That's sake like the drink and river like river. And your donation in any amount helps keep the show going. And I did want to mention, if we can get up to the next monthly donation goal, which you can see on the Patreon campaign page, I will be able to start giving back even more by holding some regular giveaways, which I'd love to do. So please consider signing up for a monthly pledge, and any amount is greatly appreciated. Our theme music is by Poddington Bear. You can find more of his music available for licensing at soundofpicture.com. Next time, our guest will be writer Brandon Taylor, so be sure to come back for that. And until then, remember, keep the channel open.